psychic spies, Stargate, remote viewing, and over 30 years of psychic work. I have a very special guest tonight. Miss Angela Ford is joining me on the Future Forecast podcast. Angela, how are you, my friend?
I'm okay. How are you tonight?
Fine, thank you. I'm so happy to have you on the program. We just had a pre-chat, just kind of going through things, and there's so many different directions we can take this in. I'd like to go through your bio real quick, just
Okay.
for our viewers out there, and then we can get started and have a conversation. So the bio I have for Angela here is Angela Ford worked for over 32 years in the U.S. intelligence community. She worked for the FBI, Army Intelligence, and the Defense Intelligence Agency for 9 years. She worked for the government-sponsored psychic program named Stargate. She was known as a remote viewer. Angela was written about in Annie Jacobson's book Phenomenon that was published in 2017. She appeared on CBS Sunday Morning New in March 2018. The BBC did a reenactment of one of the cases Angela solved for Customs for the Discovery Channel in June of 1999. Scott Carmichael, a DIA investigator, wrote a Kindle book entitled Unconventional Method. He explains how Angela helped him catch an Australian spy. In December 2015, Angela was invited to Moscow by a government-sponsored newspaper to attend a reception in honor of two books that were written about the Soviet and the U.S. psychic spy programs. Angela continues working with Dr. Ed May and his laboratories for fundamental research in Mountain View, California. Angela, that's an impressive resume you have there. And from what I gather, I'm sure there's so much more to that as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. How we're going to start? Like my work in the government, how I got from point A to point B.
Yeah, we can start there. I mean, I know Stargate is a big buzzword for people that are interested in remote viewing. Was there earlier government work before
Oh,
you got
sure.
involved in Stargate?
Yeah, I was in the system. Yeah, what
Okay.
happened was is I'm from Pennsylvania, like we discussed earlier,
Yeah.
and I came down with my sister from Pennsylvania to start working at the FBI in
Uh-huh.
Washington, D.C. My sister had a criminology background. I
Right.
had a political science degree. And we wanted to be FBI agents, but we needed 3 years professional experience. So we came
Right.
down to work for the FBI. Well, the pay was terrible. I didn't have the eyesight. We didn't have the eyesight to be an agent.
Right.
And the FBI has one of the lowest eye requirements for it's a very low eye requirement compared
Right.
to other law enforcement
Right.
agencies because they deal with white collar crime. They
Yeah.
usually wear suits. They know what they're walking into when they make an arrest.
Right.
So I figured if I couldn't make it there, I'm not going to go any place. I'm not going to be able to do anything else. I was very
Right.
attracted to the investigative work.
Yeah.
So I was working with a woman whose name was Sue, and her husband was in military intelligence, and they had just came back from Japan, and he was working with Army intelligence, and she was at the FBI, and the pay was low. So she quit the FBI and she went and worked for her husband. And a couple of months later, she gave me a call and she said, Army intelligence is looking for people with political science degrees. They're
Right.
putting them on these internships. They need young people to come in, and they put them on internships where, in a period of 2 to 3 years, you would learn all about the intelligence community because
Right.
they do this every so often to bring young people in because the older people are getting out. So you need
Right.
new people to come in. So I
And as a
applied
civilian, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
as a
you're coming in as
civilian.
a
It's
civilian
yeah, as a
contractor?
civilian,
Okay.
not the
Not enlisted or
FBI. I
yeah.
was an FBI government employee, and when I
Right.
went to Army intelligence, it was a government employee position.
Okay.
So she said you should apply because you're going to make more money than what you're making now, and then there
Right.
was room for advancement. So I applied and I did get hired. And I think the biggest thing that I had going for me was I had clearances.
Yeah.
I had security clearances because all they had to do was transfer my clearances. They
Right.
didn't have to do a background. So I think that's what sort of helped me
It
get
puts you
in right
ahead.
away.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I did this internship and I think I was on it for 3 years. and I learned, signals intelligence,
Right.
NSA, took classes, interpret the signals.
Yeah.
You learned about how imagery worked. For some reason, I ended up in Congress for about 3 months. There was a colonel that sort of just put me up there, and he said, "This may not deal with intelligence, but just go up there. It's a good thing to do or whatever." And while I was up there, the Central America was heating up.
Right.
The Sandinista communist government in
Hmm.
Nicaragua, the
Right.
insurgencies in El Salvador and Honduras. You had Noriega,
Yeah.
who was our friend at the time,
Right.
but it was a hotbed. And so when I was up at Congress, it was heating up. So when I ended my internship, they they put me in an office with analysts, and we were current intelligence analysts. We were not long range analysts. We were not forecasting. This was like we had to watch every day what was going on
Right.
and brief it on a weekly
Yeah. The
basis.
real time
So
was the sit reps, right?
they said, what area did I want? And I said, oh, I wanted Central America. So that's what I got. So that was interesting. So I ended up being a Central American analyst, and then that went into terrorism and then eventually drug interdiction,
Yeah.
because it was at the time that the first Bush was president, and he
Hmm.
allowed the military to start working with the drug problem.
Right.
So it was very, very interesting. And then I found out that the Army intelligence had this unit of psychics, or remote viewers, they called them, at Fort Meade, Maryland. And I
Hmm.
was just shocked, because I was at Arlington. I was working for Army intelligence. I was there
Right.
5, 6, 7 years and never knew it. But
Never
then
knew it.
again, the program was a special access program.
Yeah.
So
And what year was this, Angela?
this would have been in 1984.
1984. Okay.
I had found out, and I entered the government in 1979.
Hmm.
So I was
Okay.
in the government, or I entered the government 78. I was in the government like 6, 7 years, and then I was working for Army Intel, and I didn't even know that this unit existed.
Yeah.
So I always had the abilities. As a child, I had out of body experiences.
Uh-huh.
And also during this time, I was 29 at 30 years old. I started to have a lot of, it was like I started to have a lot of psychic experiences. I felt like I was opening up more and more things were going on. I started to channel. I started
Right.
to take classes at the Monroe Institute, at the
Hmm.
Mansbridge Institute, which was in Virginia. So
Yeah.
even though I was working, I had this interest in psychic. I always had the interest, and
Yeah.
I had out of bodies. I was taking classes. I was doing readings. I just started to do readings. I wasn't even charging money. So whenever I found out that this program went on, I really wanted to get involved. So I met with General Stubblebine, and this was in 84, because he was getting ready to retire, because he lost his support for the program at the joint chief of staff level at the Pentagon. Military people rotate in and out,
Right.
and I think he had support, and whoever was supporting him left, and whoever came in was not supporting what he wanted to do in this psychic world. And so he just said, forget it, I'll just retire. He started his own company.
Right.
So at the time I thought, oh, well, that was a shame, because I figured that was it. It was
Right.
1984, and I figured, well, that was it. It was nice meeting him. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but this is what happened. In 1984, General Stubblebine retired, and the people at Fort Meade, who were remote viewers, were sitting around, and they were waiting to go to other jobs. A lot of them were military, so everybody was waiting for orders to go to their next assignment. The
Right.
civilians would have probably been put back into the Army intelligence system. There was one woman who was a personnel specialist.
Hmm.
Well, what had happened was there was a man by the name of Dr. Jack Verona and Dale Graff who worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they were funding Princeton, Stanford Research Institute,
Yeah.
Duke. They were funding parapsychology research out of the defense out of the, okay, so you had the Defense Intelligence Agency,
Right.
and they were funding research at these different institutions and colleges or universities, and they were also monitoring what other countries were doing in
Right.
psi research. And of course the big one was the Soviet Union.
Correct. Yeah.
So what Dr. Verona did in 1984, when General Stubblebine retired and everybody thought they were going back to other regular jobs, Dr. Verona went to Congress and said, don't, he said, transfer the program to him. So that's whenever the Stargate program came out of Army intelligence and it went to DIA, it went to the Defense
Uh-huh.
Intelligence Agency.
Right.
And it probably took that year to make the transfer, to get everything in order, to get the
Right.
money. And then I was brought in July 1986,
You were brought into Stargate.
into 1986, July
And
1986.
what was that like? Number one, when they asked you to join the program, I mean, what was going through your mind? And then, that beginning, what was that experience like?
Well, I thought I'm sure I got there because of General Stubblebine, and I was
Right.
a practicing psychic, so I was channeling. I had started to do readings, and when I first entered, Skip Atwater told me, he said, "You have a bad habit. You have a very bad habit, but now you're with the program. Now that you're here, we're going to teach you the right way to use your abilities, or we're going to
Right.
teach you." So that told me right there they didn't want me to do my channeling or use my natural abilities.
Was that the bad habit that he was referring to? Was that you were
Yeah, the
channeling?
channeling. Oh,
Yeah, it was
sure,
frowned. Yeah, it was
sure.
frowned upon.
And
Okay.
I can remember the secretary took me out to lunch my first day,
Yeah.
and she said, "Who are you and where did you come from?" And she said that usually when they bring people into the program, they have a list of people that they want to recruit.
Right.
They usually have a list of names. My name wasn't on the list, and all of a sudden I showed up.
Yeah, you
So
are.
I think it was, so we figured it was General Stubblebine probably called the unit to the
Right.
boss and said, hire this girl, she has the talent, or she has the
Right.
abilities. And if a general was going to call, of course, even if the general was retired, they're going to
Right.
listen to him.
Of
So
course.
I think they resented that I got in um because of the general, but you couldn't advertise this job
Right.
out on the street.
Right.
And that's how people were being brought into the program. I mean,
Just recommendations.
yeah, recommendations. And so the general recommended me. So I think that they kind of resented that. They didn't like the channeling. Um, and I just felt for being a psychic office, nobody had any psychic background or experience.
Right.
And that
Right.
just, I was like, oh my God, if you live in the DC area, there's a whole underworld of psychics and people
Yeah.
working and meetings and prayer groups and healing groups. So and
Can I just ask a question about that real
yeah.
quick? Do you think, and maybe we can get into this later in our conversation, but do you think having that background as a working psychic has helped you as a remote viewer? Do you think it's
Oh my
enhanced your
gosh,
viewing?
yes. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yes.
I
Yeah.
just I just spoke with David Harker last week, and he does what he calls cowboy RV, and he says pretty much the same thing. He's like, I have all these different methods. He says, it's great to learn the structure of remote viewing, but why not use all these other tools that you have to
Oh,
get
sure.
gain all this other information? It was a great conversation I had with him. Yeah.
Yeah, so what happened is when I went into the unit, so I had to learn something called extended remote viewing.
Uh-huh.
Now, what happened was there was a guy by the name of Ed Dames, and he was the teacher for coordinate remote viewing, and he had all the military people. He had Paul Smith, he had
Right.
Lynn Buchanan was still doing ERV. He had Paul Smith, Charlene, everybody mostly was doing CRV or learning CRV. And the boss, Bill Ray, he was doing ERV. And he had a friend who needed a job. He had a friend by the name of Gene Lessman, and Gene was a civilian that was working in Germany. And when you work for the government overseas, you're only allowed to stay there for a certain period of time. It's either 3 years or 5 years. And Gene's time was up in Germany, so he had to come back to the States, and he needed a job. So Bill Ray said, well, come on, you can come work at the unit. Well, Gene wasn't psychic, so they made him a trainer. Now, I think they gave me to Gene Lessman because he needed something to do, because Ed had all the other people. So I went with Gene. And I think Bill Ray was doing extended remote viewing. So I more or less was just doing extended remote viewing, and I was doing okay. I mean, they liked my results. They liked my results as long as I stayed, if I followed whatever they said, everything was fine. But they knew that I had these abilities. And I think Mel Riley, he was interested in what I did, and I would go to his home sometime after work. And I've worked for the military. Before I went to that unit, I was working for the military. I was working in an office. We were doing the current intelligence analysis work. So I knew what it was like to work for the military. They ignore you. I'm a civilian. I'm a civilian female. They say they're not prejudiced, but I have seen young female lieutenants that not of high rank that have walked into offices and would get more respect than I would. I mean, I can remember being a full-fledged analyst on Central American affairs, and these little lieutenant females would walk in, and they were just given all of this responsibility and respect. So I knew that whenever I was in the office, the way that they treated, I knew there was a line between them and me, but the fact that I was a channelist, the fact that I was psychic before I came in, the fact that I had this background, that even made the division
harder for you, I guess.
Harder. So now, about a year and a half after I was in the unit, things started to change. The boss retired, Bill Ray retired, Gene Lessman left, Fred Atwater retired. They brought in Fern Garvin, the people at SRI who did the coordinate remote viewing. They had retired. They brought in Dr. May. So at that time, I was dealing with Fern Garvin and Dr. May, and Fern was used as a remote viewer way back in 1976 in the very early years. And he didn't want to hear about CRV. Then he said, I don't care what people do, as long as we get information. It's not the methodology that counts, it's the protocol. How can you tell anybody how to use their psychic abilities to get information? You can't tell anybody that. Okay, so everybody's doing coordinate remote viewing. They love Ingo Swan. I never met Ingo. He wasn't on staff at the time. He was living in New York. Sometimes they would go up on the weekends to visit him. So they were in the CRV world. I was in the ERV world. And then things started to change because I said, well, I do automatic writing, I do channeling. And so Fern said, well, if you want to try it, let's see how it's going to work. And then so it got to the point where and then they brought in one girl. She was in the military, but she got out of the military, but she was a reservist. Her name was Gabby. She would never even look at me in the face. So, I mean, there was definitely a divide. Even before, so I went to Fern and I said, okay, if we're gonna do this automatic writing, let's start doing it. Let's see if it works. Well, we started to get really good information. We started working on the hostages in Lebanon at the time. They had Terry Waite, Terry Anderson. So what we did is we started working on the hostages, and he wanted to know locations. So we started working the hostages, and Fern thought I was pretty good, and he said, you know what, Angela? He said, let me take this information to Dr. Verona. Let's see what he wants to do with it. So I remembered the other people said, you can't do that because we don't know if her methodology works. You have no track record whether it works or not. And they were really against Fern going with my information. And Fern said, no, I have to do this. So he went to Dr. Verona and he said, we've got some information here. And I forget what it was. I think I had Terry Anderson in the Bekaa Valley, and the analyst said he would never be in the Bekaa Valley. That wasn't the MO of Hezbollah. Well, he was. Right. After I gave them the information, they did find him in.
That's where they found him. Wow.
And then I can remember I kept saying that this guy Poe Hill had a sore throat, and when Poe Hill came out, he actually was diagnosed with throat cancer.
Oh, wow.
But so we're doing so but a couple of weeks later, we get called in to go to headquarters because there was a man by the name of Lieutenant Higgins who went to Lebanon, and he got kidnapped. He was a Marine officer, and they wanted to find him. So we went in, and and the analysts were laughing because as soon as I would give them information on where he was and how he was traveling, and as soon as I would give them information, a report would come in to confirm what I was saying.
Confirm it. Wow.
So now they wanted to know where was Higgins. So I was looking at a picture, it was old imagery, and I pointed and I said, Higgins is right there. And, of course, Ed Dames and everybody said, how can he be there? There's nothing there. Right. All there is woods. He wouldn't be out in the woods. How could he be there? And the analyst said, this is old imagery. And I said, he's there. Well, not long after I said that, there was a German hostage by the name of Cordes that the Hezbollah freed. And he went back to Germany, and our analyst went over to Rhine-Main in Germany to debrief the hostage that was let free. And he said, where is Higgins? And the guy pointed to where I pointed.
Same spot on the map, huh?
Right on the map. And the guy and the analyst said, but there's nothing there but woods. And he said, oh no, they built a structure to keep Higgins right there.
Wow.
So we decided we're going to keep. So we decided that we're going to keep going.
Was that? I'm sorry to interrupt, but was that what method were you? How were you getting that information? What were you using? Just channeling.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My automatic writing. Right. Channeling, automatic writing.
Right. And they were looking for structure, and they were looking for more of the structure and the protocols, of the CRV world at that point, correct?
They were all using CRV. I don't know what they were getting. I didn't care what they were getting, but they weren't getting what I was getting because I was the only, when the analysts were coming back, they were confirming my information. Right. So, and then we started to do some other stuff that, I was getting close. And I was kind of getting close. And then what had happened was, and I was still doing the hostages, and we were doing pretty good. And I think we were kind of getting a little bit, we kept doing them. And I think at one point, and they always wanted to know when were they coming out. And I always knew it was a August, September time period, but it was 2 or 3 years later. And I said Terry Anderson would be the last one out. And he was the most hated. But I can remember one time, Terry Waite, I don't know how it came out, but and this was all through channeling, it said that there was a man by the name of Jonathan Livingston
Right.
that would help in the release of the hostages. So, and that really wasn't a location, it was just something that came out. So and Colonel Higgins had a wife, and her office was at the Pentagon, and one of the analysts was visiting Robin. Her name was Robin
Right.
Higgins, and he saw my report on her desk, and he said, who is this Jonathan Livingston? We don't know who he is. We looked in the microfiche because we didn't have
Right.
computers at the time. And she said, oh, he's an English envoy. England just sent him to Lebanon to help in the release of the
Wow.
hostages.
And that
So
was
the
a name you
reason
got from channeling. That was the name
I
that
got
came
from
to you.
channeling, huh?
Wow, that's great.
So so when Terry Waite was released, he wrote a book, and in it he credits this guy Livingston as the guy who really cracked the nut and helped in
Yeah.
the release of the hostages.
Right.
And then we were doing other things. I was doing the Gaddafi chemicals. Do you remember at the time they thought Gaddafi had a chemical factory?
Uh-huh.
And
Vaguely. I was young, but yeah, I do.
okay, they were so what had happened was they didn't know where was he getting the chemicals, how was he getting them. So I did a session, and we think they did it on a boat. There was a rendezvous on a boat that could have been bringing the chemicals in and out, but I named the boat, I spelled it with a P. I called it potato. We called it
Uh-huh.
potato. And actually, when the analyst, we brought it to the analyst, and Dr. Verona saw the report on the analyst's desk, and he said, do you know anything about this? And the guy said, yes, the Libyans have a boat in their inventory, but it's not potato, it's a potato. It's a B instead of a P. I spelled it with a P, but I didn't put
Right.
the loop.
Right.
So, so Dr. Verona went to the head of the agency, and they put up a submarine to go and look at this vessel to find
Right.
out what it was doing. And actually, it rendezvoused like I said it was, and it came back. The it came back like highly probable. Whatever I said, it was highly probable, but nothing really happened from it. They didn't get the
Right.
chemicals or anything. But that
Right.
was
But
good, because that was nerve-wracking to know that it's when you conduct an operation in the intelligence world, you usually have more than one source of,
yep.
but
Right. You want to have multiple sources to verify the information
yeah,
coming in. And it's tough being a psychic, I guess, getting information that you
it was a
can't have a verifiable source, right? At that
yeah,
point.
yeah, and it was single
Wow.
source, yeah.
Yeah.
So then what happened was we did Gaddafi. And we did some other terrorist stuff like predictions. I
Right.
think we were able to predict an airplane, terrorist going in, striking I think it was a United flight, which we called in, and they said that they canceled the flight because they had other sources reporting the same thing.
You
And
had specific data for a specific flight coming in for you, or was it
yeah,
like,
yeah,
wow.
United, I think it was in London, United, this number, whatever. And we called it in, and the analyst said, yep, you're not the only one that said it. We called it, we got it.
Right.
So we were doing things like that.
Yeah.
So now customs has come in, and they got a hold of Dr. Verona, and they wanted to know where Charles Jordan was. And Charles Jordan was on the 10 most wanted list. There was a TV program called the 10 most wanted.
Okay.
And so Dr. Verona said, okay, we'll go look for Charles Jordan. Well, he was a customs agent that went bad. He took the drug money. So
Right.
when people started to look for him, everybody had him in Florida. They had him in the Bahamas. They had him everywhere. Except whenever they asked me, I said he was in Lowell, Wyoming. And I
Right.
spelled it Lowell. And Fern said, now, are you sure Lowell, Wyoming? He said, there's a Lowell, Massachusetts. And I said, no. I said, it's not I'm getting that, like that old Western feeling. I said, no, it's Wyoming. It's Wyoming.
Yeah.
So he took a book that had all these maps in there, and he said, well, there's not a low Wyoming, there's a level Wyoming instead of
Uh-huh.
LOWE. And
Right.
he said, close enough. I said, close enough, that's where he is. Well, I didn't want to stay and work it because all this other, then the information about drugs started to come in. And then I felt like I was in Florida. And I said, you know what? He's in Lovell, Wyoming. And I backed out. So
Right.
they took the information to Customs, and Customs said he would never be in Wyoming. It's not his MO. He's probably in, he likes the warm weather. He would never be in Wyoming. So, I didn't work it anymore. And, it's hard because you work for the government. They want a nice report. I mean, how
Right.
can they just go with 2 words, Lovell, Wyoming?
Right.
So it was about a month later or 6 weeks later, and Dale Graff came down from headquarters to Fort Meade, and he asked me to do another session. And that was the only reason I did it, because he was there. So I went and did another session, and I said, well, if you want to get this guy, you better get him now, because I felt that he was traveling west of Lovell, Wyoming. And I
Right.
explained this Indian burial ground near a hotel.
Right.
Well, they went back, Dr. Verona went back to Customs, and he said that, this one person that is good at search, she has him west of Lovell, Wyoming. And the customs agent said, he said, as we are speaking, we are apprehending Charles Jordan 100 miles west of Lovell, Wyoming.
Wow. Validation.
Okay, so we were like, oh, well, gee, and everybody was happy that I was able to do it. And I said, was it because of my information? And I was told no. They said that some guard up at Yellowstone saw the picture of him and called it in. So
Right.
we felt like we didn't get credit for it. Well, because it was because it was not a classified case. He was on the 10 most wanted.
Right.
This was an open case. It was an unclassified case.
Right.
So back in 1995, now I did the case in 1988 or 1989.
Right.
So the program closed in 1995. Well, Dale Graff, my ex-boss, lived very close to me, and he gave me a call, and the BBC came from England down to Maryland, and they wanted to do a reenactment of this case. They got a hold of the case
Right.
through, I guess, news, whatever. So they came down and they did a reenactment of the case, and they brought the customs man in. And Dale said something like, yeah, too bad we couldn't get credit for that case. And the customs man said, are you kidding? It was because of me that they had
Wow.
found the guy. And they said they did not believe he was in Wyoming. And they said
Yeah.
about 3 weeks after I said he was in Wyoming, Charles Jordan sent a picture of himself to his mother, to show that he was to show that he was fine.
Right.
And in it, there was a truck that had Wyoming license plate. And then they went on my information to start looking around a level in
Right.
that area. And what Joe McMonagle told me, because he was working on staff for Stanford Research Institute, he said, Angela, what Customs did was just send his picture out to
Right.
everybody
Flood
up
flood
in
the area.
Wyoming. And he
Right.
said, but the guy said, he said, no, it was because of you we got him.
Well, I think what's incredible about that is all of the analysts who are trained to think in a certain way and look at all these variables and details and look at his profile, right? They're saying he's in Florida, he's in the Caribbean, he's in the warmer weather. It doesn't fit. And you're coming here as an intuitive saying, okay, great. Here's what I'm seeing. And then it ends up, yep, you were right. Spot on with the state and, slightly off with the spelling of the area, which is still incredible. And they found him. I think that's amazing. I think skeptics don't
Yeah.
fully appreciate the significance of that, and including that piece where the other analysts were so way off on compared to
Well,
where you were pinpointing. Yeah,
customs just wouldn't believe he would be there.
yeah,
Um, so that was sort of like the big one. And then after that, I was able to do some other things. I did another big thing too, right? The coordinate right on. We were looking for something out on the waters on the West Coast.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was good at locating and naming and personalities. I mean, at the
Yeah.
time Gorbachev was coming into power, he wanted to be friendly to the United States. They didn't know if
Right.
you could trust him. They wanted information on him. They wanted information on the men on his cabinet.
Right.
They call it we call it a cabinet. What do they have?
I can't
Bureau
remember.
or something.
Yeah. Yep.
Little
Yeah.
So there was a lot of personalities that I did too, but I
Yeah.
can't remember everything. But
Now
those
you're
were the big ones.
I'm curious about your process, your experience during a session. Let's say you're channeling, you're looking for the guy in Wyoming. What's your input like as data is coming to you? What's that feel
Well,
like or
it's
look like?
because I write, it just comes through it just comes through. I mean, I read my writing. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
It's
Uh,
instant, it's fast, it's instant,
yeah.
it's fast.
I
I don't
love
know.
those remote viewing sessions. When I get into a viewing session and I get like a paragraph just comes out and and I say to myself like whether I'm on target or not right now, I'm using this somewhere in a story because it's such a unique like just a data flow that comes in as a writer. It's pretty neat. So you get it as right. Like do you hear things when you're channeling through or
No, it's just automatic writing.
yeah,
Just
that's it.
now. No, if I do extended remote viewing, I do that if I need to describe an area.
Right.
Like I mostly do that for when they put a picture in the envelope.
Yeah.
And and I do readings, I do remote viewing for scientists, for Ed May.
Right.
When you do a session, whatever happens, an energy will come in and
Yeah.
it stays there for a while. And sometimes you see it, sometimes you feel it,
Yeah.
sometimes you hear it. And it's just, it kind of whatever is happening,
Right.
you just go with what's happening, you write it down. And then after a while, the energy just dissipates and you come out of it and you're fine.
Right. And it's done.
But
Right.
as far as locations, it's like dowsing. I mean, as far as whenever location, I always say that when somebody wants me to access and describe, like there's a picture in an envelope, access and
Right.
describe it. To me, that's extended remote viewing. I'm not going to waste my channeling on it because
Right.
they're not going to say green grass or whatever. Okay, I'm going to go down and I'm going to relax and I'm going to visualize. I need to visualize. I need to see
Yeah.
that
Need to see
picture.
it.
So I would use extended remote viewing. If somebody wants to know about a person, I would do automatic writing. I've
Yeah.
done tarot cards. If somebody wants to know where is somebody, I would do automatic writing or dowsing.
Right. Wow. And having that tool set available. Now, with that, are you given like how much information are you given?
I don't I don't like any information.
Okay, so it's you're still getting like blind targets for things like that.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
blind targets
Yeah.
because you start if you get information, what happens is you start the left brain comes in, you start
Yeah.
analyzing,
Yep.
you're just analyzing.
Yeah. It's hard. It's really hard to separate that. Once you're aware of kind of what you're looking at or what you're looking for. Wow. So you're getting all these blind and these and has anybody ever approached you and said, you know what, we want to try to take your method and replicate it because you're so
Well,
successful with it?
well, that's what Fern said that when we started to do the automatic writing, when I started to have success, then Fern and Dr. Verona wanted me to do the automatic writing, and Dr. Verona said, call it WRV, written remote viewing. And
Oh,
everybody in the unit thinks that Fern gave it that name, but it came from Dr. Verona. I was there. And he
okay.
said, call it WRV. Because Joe McMonagle told me, he said, Angela, he didn't do CRV, and they didn't know what to call what he did. So somebody called it extended remote viewing.
Yeah.
But so Fern told the office, he said, if anybody wanted to learn my method to come to me, I would teach them. Now, do you
Yeah.
think that do you think those army officers are going to come to me?
Right.
They
No.
hated what I did. I mean, they're like, oh, I mean,
Yeah.
they wanted to gag. When Fern had a meeting, he said,
Right.
if she's open, she will teach you whatever you want. She'll teach you. Well, they weren't going to. They wanted they wanted to come in session with me to see how I did it
Right.
because they wanted to analyze me. They
Yeah.
wanted access to my they wanted access to my information because they wanted to see if I was right or wrong.
Yeah.
And after a while, for see, a lot of times the operations officer and the training people would have access to all of the remote viewers information because they would, you know, put it together in a report
Right.
and send it up. Well, everybody wanted to see my information because I wasn't always right. I mean, I had
Yeah.
successes, but
Right.
you're not always right.
No.
So they wanted to judge it. Well, she's wrong there. She's wrong. Why do you keep letting her do it? She's wrong. So it got to the point where Fern says you're not having access to her and you're not getting her information. Leave her
Right.
alone. So,
Right.
and it freed me up to do my thing. But no, they weren't gonna. Do you think they're gonna come to me to learn my method? These are Ingo
It's
Swan
yeah.
remote viewing. These are military officers. But
Right.
when you look back at it, the military is big into training.
Yep.
They hung on to that CRV manual, which was only written Dr. Verona asked SRI, gave him money and said, write something up because every
Right.
time he went to Congress to ask for money for psychics, he got laughed at.
Yeah.
So he wanted a manual that gave technical terms, called it
Right.
remote viewer, so it softened. He was
The
able to
psychic
gain
term. Yeah.
money, and that's the only reason it was there. And these people took it as their Bible.
As Bible.
And
Yeah.
so then they made a fuss and they said, I have to learn CRV because that's the way it is, CRV. So I said, fine, I'll learn CRV, but you're going to be trained in ERV. Let's do,
Yeah.
so that kind of, so they said, okay, okay. So I did some training in CRV. I think a couple of them did training in ERV, but everybody went back to their natural ways of doing something. I did
Right.
do CRV. I had a big fight with Ed Dames, and then I had to end up apologizing to him because Fern made me, which I didn't really want to do. Um,
Right.
it was sort of like we I don't know. It
It
was difficult. It was hard.
it amazes me, just seeing on social media sometimes how um remote viewers argue over one method over the other sometimes. And I'm always sitting back. I don't get involved. I try not to. And I always sit back and go, does it matter if you get results? Does it matter if it's meaningful to you, if you're learning and growing from it? I mean, it's great to debate, hey, which style works best, but then you have to take into account everybody operates differently up here. Everybody receives information differently. So there's different methods. HRVG is very visual. So for people who can see when they close their eyes, that's great. I have to work very hard to get a visual. It takes a lot of effort for me to see, but I get words. I'm very claircognizant. I know this, and I just write it down. So I think there's a lot we need to, I guess, as psychics, I'm surprised the minds aren't more open once we get into like
I know.
which style.
So what style do you use? So how do you remote view?
Well, Daz trained me in CRV. So that's, I guess I'd say that's my baseline, my structure that I work with. But I like to just kind of, I stay within the structure, because I still consider myself learning, but I do like to go out and just see where things lead me as well sometimes, and just kind of go and let it flow. Like Daz now, he has what he calls flow, and it's kind of just feeling what you're inclined to do, what tools you're inclined to use to gather information. But formally, I guess CRV is what my training is in. But it's been an amazing process learning, and I've quoted this before on the show, but like Edward Riordan, he says, first you spend all this time learning how to remote view, and then you learn how you remote view.
Hmm.
And I always thought that was a very
Yeah,
insightful.
because nobody can tell you how to use your psychic ability. That is
Right,
innate. That is
right,
unique to you. That's your
right,
thumbprint. That's your DNA. Nobody has the right to tell you how to
right.
remote view, but you have to stay in the protocol. The
Correct.
protocol is the most important. It's not the
Right,
methodology, it's the
right.
protocol.
Staying within that structure. Absolutely. And I think that's I definitely don't want to come off speaking like an authority, because I'm not, just based on my limited experience. That's what keeps you grounded, I think, staying within that protocol, but being open to however that information is coming, and whatever tools you have to record that information, I think is valuable. And then and what I like to do as well is experiment, right? And try different approaches, try different things, and see if it works. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, okay, I won't do that again.
Well, and another thing too, the more you do it, the more you open up. And then before you
Yeah,
know it, you may have started this way. And as you're
right,
opening up and you're learning and you're growing, all of a
right,
sudden you're doing something totally different.
right, right. Like there's days, especially if I am doing a second session for something, there's times I'll sit down, and before I even do my first ideogram, I get this long description of something. So I like to record it. I get it out of my
Yeah,
system,
yeah,
and then I
yeah, yeah.
and then I go through the session, and then at the end I find that was probably my best piece of data. I wish I would have just gone with that, and run with it, because it hit me before I went through any of the other stages as I'm going through a session.
Now, do you find when you write that you're being psychic? When I write, I channel.
I I compare writing for me to remote viewing. It's the creative center feels activated in the same way, as I'm just trying to get the information out, as I'm trying to get the data out. Everything, it just coalesces, and then, like when I wrote my one big book, was a research based book. Um, I'd get the ideas, and then I'd say, okay, let me write this, and let me go now look for research on it. I'd be like, oh my gosh, yes, this is that. It was The book was blowing me away as I was writing it. It wrote itself. So I
Yeah,
do
yeah.
think, yeah, artists and creative people, they're tapping into a signal line. I think whether it's music, whether it's art, poetry, whatever.
Well, no, it's writing. When you write
Yeah, yeah,
and you remote view, it's coming from the same part of the brain.
yeah. I
It
do feel that.
it's coming from the same. Music is totally different. It's more music is coming from someplace else. But I
Right.
do believe that if somebody in drawing, writing, and remote viewing comes from the same part of the brain. That's
Okay.
why a lot of remote viewers can draw, but I can't because I'm
I
more verbal. I'm more
Yeah,
verbal because I write.
yeah.
But
That's me.
I'm
I still
just
draw
more.
stick figures.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've handed in drawings but um, it, and I know a man, and he helps inventors. He helps
Right.
inventors. If you have an invention, you go see this man, and he'll help you. He gets you the patent, he gets you the lawyer, he gets you tested, he gets it out on the market, and then if you make any money from it, you pay him back for
Right.
everything that. And a lot of his inventions, a lot of men, it was in the medical field, and he's not a scientist, but because of what he does, he's met a lot
Yeah.
of these. He said, Angela, these inventors, he said, they're
Yeah.
channeling the inventions. And he
Right.
said, they don't even realize it. So, and that's what I think. When you write music, when you do art,
Yeah.
it's all channeled. And I can remember
Right.
there was one woman, she was an artist, and she wanted to cleanse out her third eye because she wanted to open up the third eye so she could be a good artist.
Right.
So I do think that people channel and they don't even realize that they're
Right.
doing it. And
Yes.
a lot of cops are very highly intuitive, where they're working on a case and something will tell them to check something out or go somewhere,
Yeah.
and they'll say, well, gee, I don't know, I just had a hunch, so
Yep.
and cops will develop that sixth sense, that
That
sixth.
was my that was my heart one of my hardest things as a police officer, being very empathic it served me so well, but it was overwhelming at times because like I remember I rarely had to use physical force with people because I could talk to them so well. When I was a rookie, I remember I was in training still, and this woman, she needed to go to the crisis center. She was having some mental health challenges, and the family, I remember my training officer, he told me, he told the family, once you sign this document, she's going, whether we have to drag her out or she walks into the car. And I said, can I go talk to her for a little bit? And she was hostile. She was aggressive. She was angry. Wouldn't let anybody in the room. I said, just give me 5 minutes. He's like, okay, rookie, go ahead. And I walked in the room and I sat down and I just started talking about dogs with her. And
Oh,
because I just felt she just needed comfort and normal conversation. And within 5 minutes, she says, I'll go, but you have to take me. I said, great, let's go. Let's get in the car. And then her family walks in. She starts cursing at everybody else. She says, leave me alone. He's taken. And we got in the car. My trainer looked at me and says, I've never seen someone talk someone down like that, because I felt what she needed. Yeah, I think in law enforcement, it does serve us well, but it can also, it takes its toll when you're that open to it too. And then here we are now, so many years later, remote viewing and revisiting those processes. Fascinating. It's been a fascinating journey. I'd like to talk about more of your experience just as a psychic outside of the military, and really just what that process is like. If you'd like, we could do that in a separate episode, or we can keep going here. I'll leave it up to you. We can end this broadcast and start a new one.
yeah, we can start a new one.
Okay, why don't we do that then? So, Angela, it's been a great discussion here, hearing that journey. I know we always hear the war stories. We read about them online with Stargate, and how this whole thing started. And it's incredible that you were, I think, such a part of that process, witnessing that history, and seeing kind of where things are now. It's so thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh
Do
my
you have any?
goodness.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It was crazy. I mean, it was just crazy time, crazy years. A lot of it was
Yeah.
just um I mean, when I see where we are now with remote viewing, with the
Right.
groups and what they're doing, and with
Yeah.
me working with Ed May, when I see where we have come, I mean, we were actually in the dark ages. When I was
Yeah.
working, we were in the dark ages. We have come
Yeah.
so far.
You were pioneers, really, especially at that time when, like you said, it was behind closed doors, and even within the official psychic work, there were still things that were frowned upon for being done. So,
Yeah, and I
you
don't
know,
know why, because actually the higher ups knew. I mean, they knew
yeah,
what channeling was. I mean,
right,
they they knew they knew what tarot cards were. I mean, and in the military would go, they're using tarot cards. And the higher ups was
right,
like, well, yeah, so what? I mean, that's what
yeah,
they, but not it was just, I think it was just a military mindset, and they were bringing
yeah,
in friends who they thought they could train. The biggest thing is that the military thought you could train somebody to do this, and you
right,
can up
yeah,
to a certain point, but it actually was the people that they were doing a little bit better, and
right,
that's what the military couldn't understand. Just don't bring anybody in. You want
right,
somebody out there that maybe had an experience, maybe studied it, maybe knows a
right,
little bit of the lingo, and they didn't want any of that. They thought that
yeah,
was just bad, 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 and they should have done what Stanford Research did. Stanford
right,
Research, when they were looking for their people to use as psychics, they went up to San Francisco and tested all the 1960 hippie leftovers, and they
right,
were
right.
getting better results. They were getting better people.
Yeah. Well, when you have a natural ability, and when you're open to it,
It's
I think
open and natural.
yeah,
Of course, you would want that. I mean,
right,
if I'm looking for a chemical engineer because I need a chemical engineer to do something, I don't
right,
want a biologist. I don't want
right,
somebody. I want. So you would think that they would have been more, but I think a lot of it was ego. Like, come on in, I can train you, or this is. I don't know what it was, but it was
right,
um it was not I don't think it was the best way to think, but then again,
right.
you're looking at the government. I mean,
Do you think? Let me put my fun conspiracy theory hat on. Do you
Okay.
think it's possible that that was intentional, saying, "Well, we don't want to open this up too much. Let's get people who, let's not look at the natural psychics, and let's look at somebody else who's not going to be able to go to that same level, because then that might uncover things that we don't want uncovered." Do you think that's a possibility?
You say that again now?
Sorry,
I think
instead of it was an intentional move to not bring in the natural psychics because they didn't want them to exposing all of these other things that they might want to keep secret or hidden.
no, they just thought that that Stanford research they just thought that with the research being done by
Right.
Stanford Research Institute and Ingo Swann, that
Right.
there was a correct way to do something, and this was
Right.
it, and nothing else mattered.
Gotcha.
But it's and but yet they would have the Seth Robert books in the but yet whenever the reading
Yeah.
material they would have the the Seth material,
The
which
Seth
Jane
material.
Roberts channel, it was a trans
Right.
channeling,
Right.
and they didn't know what I did. Ed Dames always said I trans channeled. I wasn't a trans channelist. I was an automatic writer. I was very
Right.
aware. I mean, even now, if you listen to Ed Dames or see what he wrote about me, he'll always say she trans-channeled. I was not a trans-channelist.
Right.
That's when the entity goes inside and takes over.
Yeah.
But he thought I was trans-channeling. He didn't know anything. No, I just think that they thought when they were military officers, they thought that
Right.
this was the way you did things, this was the
Yeah.
right way, and you may have Jane Roberts and you may have these other people, but it's wrong. This is the right way.
It's interesting. Just speaking from my experience as a National Guard soldier, when we deployed, I noticed a big difference from National Guard compared to active Army. Active Army, that's their whole life. It's the military structure, the military way. And the National Guard soldiers, some soldiers were plumbers or were teachers or engineers in their civilian side, and they could pull on that skills. They had such a wider range of thinking and perception of seeing things, and they did things differently and got things done in a much more efficient and better way, in my opinion. Where the active Army, they couldn't wrap their heads around, like, why are you doing it that way? This is the structure. So it's tough when you have and no disrespect to the career military guys, but they just don't have that wider
It was the
experience.
structure. It was the
Yeah.
CRB brought the structure.
Yeah, and
And
it's hard to think out of that.
they gave me a hard time, but they didn't and I didn't cave in because before I went to the unit, I was working at a much higher echelon
Yeah.
than so I mean, I was briefing generals on
Right.
a weekly. I was working at a much higher and
Yeah.
still being looked at as the civilian female, and I
Right.
had battles there.
Right.
Um, and because I wanted to go to the psychic program, and I talked to the General Stubblebine, my bosses were upset because I jumped the chain of command. So I had fights even before
Right.
I went to the unit.
Right.
So everybody said, "Boy, you handled it well." I'm like, this was a walk in the park. I mean, for
Yeah.
what the hard time that they were giving me, I'm like, this
Right.
is a walk in the park compared to what I've just come from. So it didn't
Yeah.
bother me. Plus, I knew I belonged there. I knew that I had the abilities and I knew I was
Right.
doing something. And the
Right.
fact that I was working operations, taking my information, getting it to analysts, and being acted upon
Right.
either as sole source or with other information, I was doing my job.
Right.
I'm doing my job.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a lot to be proud of, because it's not easy. You and I talked beforehand. I remember just being the guy that, people didn't believe when you're looking at information. And it was my intuition. Like, there's something going on here. And so many people laughed at me and told me, like, nope, nope, that's not happening. And then lo and behold,
It
we
was.
uncovered some stuff, because I felt it was there and I kept digging for it, Well,
Yeah. And it was still, and when they closed the program in 95, and then I had to go back and be an analyst, because I was political science degree, history. I mean, I was
Right.
an analyst, all
Right.
source analyst. Give me the information, you go through it, and then you write a report. But when I went back, it was the same thing. These guys
Yeah.
in intelligence, oh my goodness, some of the stuff I put up with, I I was getting ready to retire in 2010, and I was like, it never changed in all of these
Yeah.
years. And that yet they put men through this awareness. You've got to treat a woman the same way
Right.
as a man. And I was trying to get a paper through, and my team leader had my paper, and he wouldn't put it through, and that's how you get graded or get a good rating. The paper
Right.
needed to get published.
Yeah.
So I went to him one night, and I'm looking, he's checking all of my footnotes to make sure what I'm saying is right. And
Right.
I said, you've got to get that paper through, or I'm not going to get credit. Well, this paper has to be right. It's it represents
Right.
our agency. Just dissed me right down.
Right.
Well, I'm working with another guy, and this guy gives the same guy, our team leader, his paper. The guy doesn't even read it and sends it up the system, but yet he's worrying
Wow.
about what I'm
Right.
saying.
He's looking at
Well, the
yours.
paper came back from the front office, and it said this is a piece of crap, and the footnotes aren't right. But
Right.
and I'm like, so, but that went on. That a lot of that went on.
Yeah. That's hard. That's hard dealing with that, but you persevered, and
Oh
you've got some
man.
great stories to tell for it. Angela, any final thoughts on this discussion before we move on and talk more about just psychic life in our next discussion?
No, I think, but I think that it's, I'm very surprised, but I think it's very good that they've got the remote viewing. That I think when you see all of the viewing groups out there and all
Yeah.
of the people that are part of it, I've met a lot of them. I've talked to a lot of them,
Yeah.
and they're very diverse. They're very intelligent,
Right.
and I feel like they may start out in CRV,
Right.
but after a while, they really are. They're wanting more. They're developing more. They're asking more questions.
Right.
So I think that's great, because I don't really feel like they're staying in that CRV. Eventually, they come
Right.
out of it.
Yeah.
They may start in CRV, but after a while, they're starting to ask questions, and they
Right.
want more, and they want to know more, and they want to teach. They want to learn. So I just think it's great, because I think that's even going to add more knowledge to the field too. So I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Keep branching out and learning all that you can, and don't allow yourself to be limited. The structure is great; it's very important, but keep that open mind, right, and see
It
where
cha-
else you can grow.
it just changes you when you start remote viewing,
Yeah.
whether it's in CRV. It changes you. It's going to,
Uh
at
huh.
some point, you're going to change, and
Yeah.
because of that change, other things are going to happen to kind of move you along or evolve. You're going
Right.
to be evolved and do things differently. You're going to have a higher mindset. So I think it's just fascinating that there's all these people in the world that's doing this,
Yeah.
all based on a small government program that didn't amount to a hill of beans.
Yeah. And now look where it's going. It's amazing to watch it unfold. Just having felt that whole my for so much of my life, wanting to be a part of something like this, and to now actually be doing it. It's like a dream come true. So, Angela, it's been great. It's
Well,
really
you've
been
had a
great.
very interesting life though too.
I sure have. I've bounced around quite a bit, and I think that and in hearing your journey, the synchronicity of events, I mean, it's like each one built on another to prepare you for what it is that you were doing, right? And that's how I feel with my journey. From each
It was,
step that I went through, it puts me where I needed to be to learn what I needed
yeah,
to do the
synchronicity.
next job.
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
like some people write down their goals, 10 goals,
Yeah.
you couldn't do I couldn't do it. It was just,
Uh-uh.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep. It was, yeah, I'm right there with you. But I'm happy with how things have turned out. I really am. So, well, we're going to dive into, I think, just general life as a psychic and those fun, interesting, woo-woo, mysterious experiences that tend to follow us throughout our life as we do this kind of work. So that'll be in our next episode
Oh,
of the
yeah.
Future Forecast podcast. Angela, do you have any thing you want to put out there in terms of people getting in touch with you, or
Just
you
my
know,
email. Do you have my email? Yeah, just
can
just
can
email.
can you read it out? Do you want to read it out on the air? Or
Yeah, my email is my name backwards. It's Ford, Ford, Angela, Angela 04 at gmail.com. And
okay.
and the email is the best way.
And what kind of services would
I
you
give
provide to people?
readings, and I teach
Readings?
remote viewing, and I give readings, and I teach other classes. I teach how to read auras, I teach how to read tarot cards, I teach basic numerology.
Wonderful. So I think we'll talk about some of that in our next podcast. So please stay tuned. And for more on what we do here at the Future Forecasting Group, you can visit us at futureforecastinggroup.com. We've got some incredibly talented,
Good.
insightful, and entertaining remote viewers on our team, with a whole team behind them. Our analysts do incredible work, ranging from obviously looking at cryptocurrency targets in the future, looking at world events every month. They're predicting what's going to be in the news in the upcoming month. We've got great mystery targets, great woo, and all around just great discussion and a great community. So again, futureforecastinggroup.com. Angela, thank you so much for being my guest, and looking forward to our next discussion. And on behalf of the Future Forecasting Group, I'm Dennis Nappi II. Thanks for watching.